why does no one talk about the fact that we're slowly moving towards a World War III scenario? And to what extent more can the United States get involved? $100 billion that we have provided to Ukraine is more than many countries have to run their entire governments with. And don't even get me started on the likelihood that tons of that money is being stolen and we have no idea where it's going. And there are undoubtedly billions of dollars that are going to end up in the pockets of kleptocrats over there. That's certainly going to happen. But how is no one sitting around saying we're a year in now and we've spent $100 billion? At some point, you're pot committed, right? For those of you out there who play poker, at some point, you've anteed up so many times. What happens if Ukraine ends up losing this war? And we've spent $100 billion on it. Joe Biden making a covert secret trip to Ukraine, and the amount of attention that is receiving relative to East Palestine, Ohio, to me is a jarring disconnect that speaks to the failure of the Biden administration on all fronts. So I do want you to listen to Joe Biden today in Ukraine as he talks all about the importance of Ukraine to United States interests.
It's presumptuous of me to say this, but I thought it was important that the President of the United States be here the day the attack began. Because as the President remember, I was warning the world that he was going to attack. I was certain of it. And I thought it was critical that there would not be any doubt, none whatsoever, about U.S. support for Ukraine in their war against the brutal attack by Russia.
So I think many of you are reacting as I am when you see this story and the way that it's playing out. President's Day in the United States, a holiday where, in theory, we come together and celebrate the past accomplishments of former presidents, George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, among others, based on when their birthdays are. And Joe Biden makes a calculated decision to travel to Ukraine, and not just go to Ukraine, to pledge that he's going to keep sending as much money from you, the American taxpayer, to Ukraine as long as it takes and as much as it costs. Listen to cut 2.
Together, we've committed nearly 700 tanks and thousands of armored vehicles, 1,000 artillery systems, more than 2 million rounds of artillery ammunition, more than 50 advanced launch rocket systems, anti-ship and air defense systems, all defend Ukraine, and that doesn't count the other $500 million we're announcing with you today and tomorrow. That's going to be coming your way. And that's just the United States in this piece.
So your tax dollars being taken out of your pocket and sent to Ukraine, where we are soon to have committed $100 billion or more in assets, in your tax dollars, in your hard-earned money for Ukraine. Simultaneously, the Biden administration cannot even recognize, isn't even willing to discuss what is going on in East Palestine, Ohio, where we talked with you on Friday. So many people in that area are terrified to drink water. They're afraid to even go there. Look, they canceled a high school basketball game in the area because another team didn't feel comfortable even traveling into East Palestine and playing right now. So Joe Biden doesn't have time to take an hour-long plane flight from Washington, D.C. to East Palestine, Ohio, to deploy all the resources that are necessary to figure out what exactly happened there. But he's got the time to get on Air Force One and fly all the way over the Atlantic and go into Ukraine for a staged photo op with Zelensky. As it's worth noting, the amount of money and attention and material continues to grow in Russia to the point now where even Anthony Blinken himself is talking about the fact that, hey, we're concerned that China's going to provide lethal aid to assist Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Listen to Cut 10.
We have seen them provide non-lethal support to Russia for use in Ukraine. The concern that we have now is based on information we have that they're considering providing lethal support. And we've made very clear to them that that would cause a serious problem for us and in our relationship.
Lethal support. What would that entail? What do you think?
Weapons.
That's ammunition. That's
primarily weapons.
Primarily.
There's a whole gamut of things that fit in that category, for everything from ammunition to the weapons themselves.
Okay, so remember when Buck and I talked with you about how there was kind of a slow drip towards World War III, and that as this thing continued, the pressure to provide more and more substantive support for Ukraine would only grow. And now they've got tanks, as you heard Joe Biden announcing in Kyiv earlier. And now there is discussion, well, what sort of fighter jets might we be willing to provide? As this continues to move closer, remember, we're coming up on the 1-year anniversary of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. So as we are inching closer and closer to that 1-year anniversary, we basically hit a stalemate. There's a quagmire. Both sides very much locked in, not a lot of movement going on. It doesn't appear that Vladimir Putin feels any pressure to end his war in Ukraine, even though there are reports out there that maybe 60,000 Russian soldiers have potentially died. The numbers out there are around 200,000 killed and wounded in terms of total casualties. Yet Russia has continued to send more manpower towards the front lines. They even have cleared out many Russian prisons and told the otherwise inmates there, if you fight for us in Ukraine, we will give you your freedom and basically consider your debt to society wiped clean. So Russia is all in on this invasion of Ukraine, and it continues to grow. And simultaneously, and I think this is very important, there is a huge contrast that is developing between what Joe Biden cares about, Ukraine, and what he doesn't care about. At home, domestic policy. Why in the world is Joe Biden more focused on Ukraine's border than he is on our own southern border, as millions of people are coming across? Things are so bad, in fact, that they're now talking about having to shift resources to our northern border because so many people now have recognized that if they can get into Canada, that they can walk across the northern border just as easily as they can the southern border. And people are starting to exploit that now as well. Effectively, we have almost no border security in this country right now. 5 million people have come in, at least since Joe Biden became president. As the weather gets better, there will be more and more of an influx as we get into March and April and May than we have already seen. And so that amazing amount of people that are coming in here, this frankly massive amount of illegal immigration that we have never seen before, is contrasted by Joe Biden's complete focus on the borders of Ukraine. Meanwhile, you've got, I think, in a brilliant stroke, Donald Trump traveling to, the plan is, East Palestine to see this for himself and probably bring more media attention to what's going there. That's really what it's about when you decide as a president or a presidential candidate to travel somewhere. What you're really doing is showing people what you care about, because the media that will travel with you will write and talk about your trip in that context. So Trump is shining a light on East Palestine. Today, you've also got Ron DeSantis in New York City drawing issue with all the soft on crime policies that have existed that have led to New York continuing to set record high crime rates. Also, the trip for Ron DeSantis to New York acts as another opportunity to recruit New Yorkers. over 60,000 of them have moved from New York City to Florida since in the past year alone, I believe is the number, which is frankly unprecedented. And you look at what is going on, and to me, there is a clear line in the sand being drawn. Joe Biden is a globalist who is more concerned about what happens to Ukraine, and this isn't even contemplating the potential connections that remain to his son's illegal behavior potentially surrounding Ukraine and the Biden crime family's money they've made off of Ukraine. Remember, that was the crux of the impeachment. The first impeachment of Donald Trump was actually related to the Ukraine phone call where he pointed out these improper connections between the Biden administration and Ukraine. But when you look at this, it seems quite clear that Democrats are sending the message, we care more about Ukraine's sovereignty and Ukraine's border than we do the United States. Because you've got a Chinese spy balloon floating across the entire United States. You have the southern and now northern borders both crippling as people come across without any restraint virtually at all. And yet Joe Biden on President's Day, a day that Americans typically come together and celebrate our past, is not even in this country, even as there are many different incidents and issues that would be very much deserving of the president's attention, including, as I said, East Palestine in particular, where people continue to be wildly uncomfortable with the response from FEMA and the quote-unquote experts there. I will also point out, and when I come back, I'll discuss this a little bit more as we move throughout this hour, the presidential election is running through the Big Ten states. I feel very confident. This is me as a sort of a sports fan. I look at all of the Midwest as the Big Ten states. Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin are probably going to decide who wins the 2024 presidential election. Focusing on what's gone wrong in Ohio and East Palestine is incredibly smart political move for Donald Trump. Brilliant even. But Biden made it even more of a signature statement by Trump by choosing to ignore and avoid any discussion surrounding East Palestine and instead flying over to Poland and then sneaking into Ukraine to brag about how well things are going there and how many more tens of billions of your taxpayer dollars can be spent there to protect Ukrainian sovereignty while we won't even protect what's going on in the United States. I don't understand. As we in the Democrats, in the Democrat Party, we should say, as we deal with the fact that they remain obsessed with the Ukrainian border, has anyone really sat down and wondered what would happen if suddenly we talk about China sharing materials, we talk about Iran certainly entering into a closer and closer relationship with Russia? What if somehow actual troops from Iran or from China end up committed towards Russia and their invasion of Ukraine? Because at some point, we are so involved that not having boots on the ground becomes a very slim line, right? If we're giving aircraft, if we're giving tanks, if we're giving all of the advanced United States material to Ukraine and they are killing Russians with it, imagine what our response would be if other countries were doing that and claiming, oh, we're not really involved. If truly 60,000 Russians have died so far in Ukraine, how many of those 60,000 Russian deaths are in some way directly attributable to United States military materials that we have provided to Ukraine? A third of them? A quarter of them? More? If you're in Russia, at some point, don't you say, yeah, you know what? I think America's pretty involved here. And then if you're now coming closer and closer to China and Iran as you are, why does no one talk about the fact that we're slowly moving towards a World War III scenario? And to what extent more can the United States get involved? $100 billion that we have provided to Ukraine is more than many countries have to run their entire governments with. And don't even get me started on the likelihood that tons of that money is being stolen and we have no idea where it's going. And there are undoubtedly billions of dollars that are going to end up in the pockets of kleptocrats over there. That's certainly going to happen. But how is no one sitting around saying, we're a year in now and we've spent $100 billion? At some point, you're pot committed, right? For those of you out there who play poker, at some point, you've anteed up so many times. What happens if Ukraine ends up losing this war and we've spent $100 billion on it? We're just gradually tiptoeing more and more into this issue and into this war. And let me just point out, how much more secure would the United States actually be if we had committed $100 billion to our southern border and actually shut it down? Remember, these are your dollars coming out of your wallet, your taxpayer dollars, that Joe Biden is pledging today that he's going to remain committed to Ukraine, to protecting their border. How is it that more Americans aren't looking around and saying, wait a minute, there are 5 million people that have entered this country illegally since Joe Biden became president. Why in the world are we committing $100 billion to Ukraine, potentially creating a ripe and very dangerous scenario where World War III could legitimately break out? And what are we gaining in the measure of American security interest? And how wildly important is this opportunity right now for Republicans to speak out and actually focus on the Midwest in this country, the Big Ten states, where who the next president of the United States is going to be, which to me directly corresponds to East Palestine and the failures there. So this is a big deal. Obviously, the disaster that is East Palestine and what is going on in Ukraine and the battleground that we are emerging in soon for 2024. I was reading over the weekend, reports are Joe Biden is expected to officially announce that he is running in April. And barring some sort of major health-related issue, Biden does not appear to have any sort of significant Democrat opposition. And so he's not really going to have to campaign during the primary season. And Joe Biden, therefore, is likely to be, I think, a substantial likelihood that he's going to be the Democrat nominee. The only thing that could happen, again, major health-related condition that even the Biden administration couldn't hide, right? Something where we got John Fetterman in the hospital for months at a time, potentially now with his clinical depression. Something where Joe Biden would go to the hospital for weeks at a time, significant health-related issue that would have to retire him effectively as a politician. Barring that, he's going to be on the ballot in November of 24. Here's what I believe Republicans have to recognize. And I understand that we're going to have the primary season and people are going to focus on Iowa, and then they're going to focus on New Hampshire, and then they're going to focus on South Carolina, and that's going to be fun. Buck and I are going to have a great deal of enjoyment working you through early spring 2024 as we decide who the Republican nominee is going to be. And that's going to be a battleground. But this election, we can already tell you exactly where it's going to be decided. And the reason why I think East Palestine and Ukraine are such interesting contrasts is because Republican, whoever the nominee is, if it's Trump, if it's DeSantis, if it's Nikki Haley, if it's Vivek Ramaswamy, who we had on, if it's Mike Pence, if it's Mike Pompeo, whoever it is, basically the 2024 campaign, that candidate just has to move to the Midwest and they have to live there. Because I'm telling you, the South is going all red. I live here. Georgia is going to flip back. I know there are a lot of you Georgians out there listening right now who said to yourself, my goodness, what in the world did we do that we voted for Joe Biden? You screwed up, Georgia. But I think you have an opportunity to make up for it. in 2024. And I've said for a long time, I don't know that there could ever be an agreement, a coming together between Brian Kemp and Donald Trump. But if I were the presidential candidate, I would pick Brian Kemp as my running mate in Georgia and just end Georgia as a state that is in play once and for all. Because Brian Kemp has run a whale of a campaign against Stacey Abrams. He won by almost 8 points. If you put Brian Kemp on a ticket, Brian Kemp guarantees you Georgia. That basically means you don't have to do hardly anything in the South. I love it down here. I like when the president comes through. You can raise money. You can do a little bit of a handshake. But you take all of the South off the board. Much of what I would call the traditional West already off the board, right? The Wyomings, the Montanas, the North Dakotas, the South Dakotas, all of that area, Nebraska, it's all red. You know, certain areas you aren't going to win, New York, California, don't even worry about them. This race is going to come down to, if you do what I did, what I'm telling you to do, and take Georgia off the board, this race comes down to about 5 states, right? Can you flip Nevada? I think you could. And there's an argument that Joe Lombardo, who is the governor of Nevada, if he could deliver the state of Nevada, that would be a move worth considering too. Can you flip Arizona back? I just spent a week out in Arizona. I think the answer is yes. The right Republican wins Arizona with ease. And then you look at the Midwest and you say, we only need probably one of these 3 states and we win in 24. Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. Don't overcomplicate this. And what overwhelmingly makes the difference in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania? White, middle-class voters. That's it. That's the election. Now, I think, again, Republicans are going to grow the Hispanic, the black, and the Asian vote. I'm writing my newest book. It's going to be out in September. Data reflects massive movement in black, Asian, and Hispanic support between 2018 and 2022. The right Republican candidate is going to dominate and continue to blow up the identity politics coalition of Democrats. But why East Palestine matters so much is the reason why Democrats aren't showing up there is because it's white, rural, working class people. And the Democrat Party has turned their back on those individuals, and they don't care about you at all. And as a result, East Palestine is being completely ignored. And that speaks to the larger message, which Donald Trump was so fantastic about, surrounding the forgotten man and woman in those Midwestern states that he flipped in 2016 when he had Michigan, when he had Wisconsin, when he had Pennsylvania, and people forget he nearly flipped Minnesota as well. That is where this election is going to be won. And I don't know that we can even come up with a better example of a failure to care about Americans and American interest than Joe Biden turning his back on East Palestine. Trump is going to be there on Wednesday, by the way. I believe he's scheduled to be there. Then Joe Biden turning his back on East Palestine, refusing to send the Secretary of Transportation, the worthless Mayor Pete, and instead gallivanting around in Europe to celebrate Ukraine and the $100 billion that he has spent there. America First is real. America First is tangible. And those of us in the Midwest who have spent time there, who have friends and family there, know that the Midwest is often the most overlooked place in the entire country. I mean that seriously. My wife is a Michigander. I spend a lot of time in the Midwest. I love the Midwest. You guys know that I came out of the world of college football. I love the SEC. I love the Big Ten. I'd like to apologize again to everybody at Ohio State for telling you to put all your money on the Buckeyes to beat Michigan. I was 100% wrong on that one, as my wife, the Michigan grad, lets me know all the time. But Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Michigan, it's where the election's going to be decided. And a big part of why Ohio has gone from alongside of Florida. Remember, Florida and Ohio were the two states that everybody had to win in order to be elected president. Now they're both off the board. Those are solid red states. Same thing can happen in Pennsylvania. Same thing can happen in Wisconsin. Same thing can happen in Michigan. I really do believe it. But it's a matter of making it the focus and the emphasis of the Republican campaign. I love, although I'm disappointed that it's not here because I'm from Nashville, I think there's been a smart strategic move made. Milwaukee is going to be where the 2024 Republican convention is. I bet Buck and myself will be up there for a substantial period of time surrounding that RNC event. That's the battleground. That's where the election is decided. That's where we need boots on the ground. By the way, I've got a poll question up for you right now. What would you rather American politicians have spent $100 billion on? Securing our southern border or providing $100 billion for Ukraine to defend their border? 94% of the votes right now in my poll, 4,000 of you have voted in the first 5 minutes. 94%, $100 billion to the U.S. border. This is real. This is tangible. Americans understand it. This has to be hammered home again and again. Joe Biden, on President's Day, decided to make the trip to Ukraine to brag about spending $100 billion there to defend Ukraine's border when he won't even defend the border of the United States or lend presidential attention to people who are struggling in East Palestine.